Hello, Americans. I'm Kenton McNall. It's Constitution time. Today is Wednesday, November 18th, 2020. And we're very much still in the middle of whatever it is we're in the middle of, which I continue to hope is just a temper tantrum by the outgoing executive, but maybe more, maybe worse. But that's not my topic for this evening. I thought I'd practice what I'm preaching a bit, or at least rehearse to practice what I'm preaching. I'm preparing to send a letter, probably one of many, to our president-elect to ask him for some things that I feel that our Constitution needs from him, and that I, as an American and a voter, very much need from him, that are related to the Constitution. Our Constitution has taken quite a beating over the last many years, preceding the current executive, but especially in the last 4 years. Its provisions have been tested to the limits. The seams and cracks that are only filled by precedent and tradition have been stretched to their limits and overstretched. And it's been confusing to watch that happen, because things that I thought would immediately cause a pretty major ruckus have just gone by with almost no notice. And those things need to be shored up. And that's one of the things that our president-elect, when he becomes president, is going to have to do. Because what's been done, as I've said, the bell has been rung by the current executive, and it can't be unrung. Mr. Brennan, a former CIA director, was on one of the TV networks today saying that President-elect Biden will have to try to convince people that the current executive was an aberration. And unfortunately, he won't be an aberration. Others will follow his example. And even he will attempt to come back and back up the dump truck and run over us again in 4 years if we don't do something about it. And that's what Mr. Biden has to take on. And, you know, he's been handed a pretty big bill of goods here between COVID and a fairly dysfunctional government and all the other challenges that we have as a country. But that's the job. That's the deal. That's what he took on. So where to start? Well, that will probably take many episodes to go through all of it. But I think starting with the presidency itself is not a bad place. So many of our, whatever you want to call them, historical norms, traditions, suggestions, have just been run over. And let's just start with simple things like emoluments and the idea that the incoming president is supposed to divorce himself from his business enterprises, put them in a trust, turn them over to family, whatever. The president is not supposed to make money from the presidency. But those norms were run over in the first months of this executive's tenure. And those rules, they have to be shored up. They have to be put into law, hopefully. We'll talk about how in just a few minutes. The security of the personnel of the incoming president, we all remember, even though it's a faded memory now because so much has happened every single day to make us forget. But people who shouldn't have been able to get security clearances got security clearances. How did that happen? How can that be shored up? How can that be fixed by President-elect Biden? Everyone has always, all presidents in the modern era at least, have shown their tax returns as a matter of course to ensure, to let the American people know that we understand where this person, who's usually a wealthy person, got their money, where it came from, and that they're being honest about it. And we all know the tax return story. That needs to be taken out of the realm of tradition and put into law. And let's talk a little bit more about how President-elect Biden might have to do these things, because it might not be easy. It might not be easy to get any legislation passed if we have the usual obstruction of one party by the other, especially in the Senate. So the first how, President-elect Biden, is you need to be in Georgia, and you need to make sure that you have at least your 2 years that the last few presidents have enjoyed of the ability to have at least a chance to get legislation through Congress. And it's not a sure thing. Having the best that can be hoped for is a 50-50 split with a tie break by the vice president. Even that's not a sure thing. Sometimes it's hard to wrangle all those votes. Sometimes you have somebody cross over. So, but at least you need a shot. And to do that, you've got to do everything you can to make that happen in Georgia. But if you can't do that, if you can't get it through the right way with legislation, and after what we've all seen happen, both houses should be willing to do legislation to take these norms and put them into law that isn't questionable. So if somebody wants to run for president, they know you're going to have to show your tax returns, and you're going to have to give up your business interests for the time of your presidency. That's not at question. I personally don't want to see any more trillionaires, billionaires, pseudo-billionaires in office under these conditions. So if you can't get it through by legislation, then Mr. Biden, you're going to have to do something very tough, but that the current executive has had no problem doing. You're going to have to do it with executive orders, and you're going to have to stretch the limits of executive orders. If you can't get a law passed that says anyone running for president has to show their tax returns, then you need to put an executive order in place to make sure that that happens. And guess what? Executive orders are either worth the paper they're written on or they're not. They sure seem to be with the current executive. They will with you too. So that in the next presidential election cycle, nobody who refuses to show their tax returns can become president because you did an executive order. And if someone after you is president who wants to get rid of that executive order, they can, but they'll certainly be showing their colors if they do. And the American people will be able to see that. Unfortunately, in today's political climate in Washington, and with the way that our normal legislative process has been hijacked by the Senate, in the Senate, you're going to have to play the game that Barack Obama had to play and that the current executive has played. And you're going to have to play it well, and you're going to have to be tough about it. So those are just a few of the items related to the presidency that you're going to have to deal with. There are many, many, many more, but there are other areas to talk about as well. One, sir, is accountability. I was distressed to hear news reports that indicated that President-elect Biden had made the statement that he did not want to spend his presidency trying to prosecute the current executive. Sir, you cannot let what has happened to our democracy and our Constitution stand. If you do, it's a wide open invitation for anybody else that wants to do it, including the same executive. It is unfortunately your responsibility to do what must be done, investigate what must be investigated, make sure that the tax returns get released, for example. They were not released by executive order. You'll be the executive now. You can get them released, I would assume, unless somehow these things only work one way. The people who did wrong in supporting these things must also be accountable. And in the press, they call this a blacklist. But if there's significant wrongdoing, we can't be deterred because somebody puts a label on the fact that you have to look into it. You just have to do what needs to be done. And sir, of course, you don't have to do this personally. It's just something that you have to make sure is done. And it also doesn't have to be done on day one, but it does need to be done. What's happened in the Justice Department cannot stand. It cannot just be allowed, or it will simply happen again. And when if it's allowed to stand, and these things that happen become precedent, then it will be pushed even farther next time, and you can't allow that. It's a raw deal, I know, but that's the deal. That's the job that you took on. You have much higher priorities at the beginning of your presidency, starting with hopefully getting into the actual White House and continuing with COVID and many, many other priorities. But this also is one that must be done. I don't like to rely on notes because I can't read them very well. And of course, as we've talked about many times, one of the things that our Constitution has most suffered from, and that the country has most suffered from, is the paradigm that has grown up in our legislative process, where the majority leader of the Senate has essentially taken on the role of president, become the most powerful person in Washington. Legislation can't even be considered unless he allows it, and he doesn't allow it. And sir, you've got to do what you've got to do to challenge that. And again, if you can't do it legislatively, well, the Senate has made rules that affect your presidency. You're going to have to try to make rules that affect the rules of the Senate. Who's to say an executive order can't do that? It's time to find out, if you have no other way. Hopefully the voters will also help you by holding those accountable who have created the situation and removing them from their elected offices. That's the number one best way for these things to happen. But if not, you've got to do what you can do. You've got to try what you can try, in the hopes that we can restore our constitutional government in the form it's supposed to be in, so that a future president can, or future House of Representatives or future Senate can get the right laws passed to shore up these areas of our Constitution that have proven to be weak under relentless attack in the last few years. Sir, I'm a little concerned that you want to go back to normal like all the rest of us do, and you want to return to the form of government that you knew so well before you became vice president, and really, along with President Obama, were caught up in all of this and victimized by it, and so that you couldn't accomplish as much as you otherwise could have in your term of office. Hopefully that's not the normal you want to return to, but you want to return to a previous time where there was still courtesy and understandable rules of conduct. And that will only return if you are strong and make it return. I know that you can do that. I think you're a positive person, and you hope for the best. Be strong and don't shirk this responsibility. It is important that the precedents, that the what has been happening over the last 4 years do not become precedent, do not become something that can be repeated by the next strongman wannabe who becomes executive of our country. By the way, I have set things up so that I'm always, same thing this evening. Whenever I don't look at the chat, there's always lots of chat. When I do look at the chat, there's no chat. So So there's a good suggestion here from a viewer that says perhaps a rule could be created that all bills from one chamber must be voted on within X number of days. Great suggestion, simple suggestion. And I guess my point this evening is if that suggestion can't be adopted as a rule from within the chambers, that perhaps it needs to be adopted by an executive order. There's lots of really super reasonable things that could be done if the two chambers would simply work together. But that's the problem. They are not working together. And they seem to have lost the ability to work effectively together. I know that President-elect Biden hopes to restore that ability because of his personal relationship with the majority leader of the Senate, and I hope for that as well. What I am advocating for is the strongest possible approach if he can't get that done, because it's in the best interest of his presidency as well, because he won't really be able to accomplish much if he does not take some action. And I hate to say follow the example of your predecessor, but that's what the predecessor has done. He's just simply made the assumption that he can do whatever he wants with executive orders, and has. And that's I think what President-elect Biden is going to have to do as well. And that's my topic for this evening. Strong words, I know, and things that many may not agree with, but I truly believe that, you've got to fight fire with fire. And in our current climate, there may not be another good way for some time to come. Regardless, I wish our president-elect the very, very best of everything, and good luck in the very tough job that he's taken on. And I want to be very supportive of the change. So the things that we want that he can't get to right away, and even the things we want that he says he won't do, we've got to do our best to continue to support him and all of our leaders to the best of our ability. Thank you for joining me this evening, Americans. Be safe, be well. Don't give COVID a chance to get an advantage on you. Keep your advantage over COVID. Good night.